at the history of South Africa and the whole system of apartheid and Nelson Mandela. So looking at South Africa is at the very bottom of the continent of Africa. The first people to live in the area were black Africans who spoke the Bantu language. Around 1652, the Dutch came to settle in South Africa. And remember, the Dutch is the Netherlands, which is located in Europe. And we already talked about how Europeans came to Africa and colonized different areas. So they're going to come to South Africa and colonize it. They're going to defeat many Africans and force them to work as servants and as slaves, people that were originally from South Africa. In 1806, Great Britain is going to capture the colony from the Dutch. And for 100 years, they're going to fight. There's going to be a war between Britain and the Dutch over South Africa because the resource of gold and diamonds were discovered in South Africa, which is a lot of money. So eventually, a system of apartheid is going to develop in this country. The British is going to force blacks off the mineral-rich lands of the diamonds and the gold into what is called reserves. In 1948, the racist Nationalist Party was elected, instituting the system of apartheid. Under apartheid, the government is going to divide the people into 4 racial categories. And the 4 groups are the blacks, the whites, the Indians, and colored, are people of mixed race. That maybe people from these different categories, they got married and they had children, and so you have mixing of races, which is going to put them in this category of the mixed race. The whites are going to enjoy all the riches of South Africa. The blacks and Indians are going to be at the bottom. If you remember when we talked about Gandhi and his visit to South Africa and the scene in the movie about Gandhi, how he was asked to move to the back, they're going to be seen as lower than the white South Africans. So what is apartheid? It dictated where people could live and what jobs they could hold. Even in the school system, like they would not educate the black South Africans about math and science. They would only learn about task-driven jobs like farming. They wouldn't let them get that extra education. Blacks had to live on reserves, which they made up, the reserves made up 13% of the land. However, it was 68% of black South Africans that lived in the country. They were considered foreigners in their own country. So the whites required them to have passports and paper to enter the white areas. A black South African just not walk into a white area without a passport or papers. They would not have been allowed to get into that certain area. The sad thing is 87% of the land went to the white people, which they only made up 17% of white South Africans lived in the country. So you see it's not a fair number range. The reserves were very poor. They had poor soil for farming, not many schools and hospitals in the reserves. So a lot of times, the black South Africans, they needed to go work. They needed to leave their families and go into the towns. So when they left their families, they would live in what was called townships. Black men lived in townships for work. Typically, the township's home was a shack without running water or electricity. And running water is like our toilets when we flush them. And having a faucet for water, they would probably have to walk to a river to get water or go somewhere and dig a hole and use the restroom there. When I say they didn't have no running water or electricity, so they would have to use candles. The blacks could not enter the white areas after dark, or they would get in trouble or get arrested. The towns became the center for black groups who resisted the white government, such as the African National Congress. So now we're like in the 1900s, and a lot of the black South Africans are frustrated with this system of apartheid. So while they're living in these townships, they're building basically resistance groups. And one of those is the African National Congress. Now the government is not going to like the African National Congress, so it's going to imprison several individuals that are part of that movement. And one of the most important individuals worldwide known throughout the whole country, our country, the United States, is Nelson Mandela. He just passed away last year. He was arrested for protesting apartheid. He's going to eventually spend 27 years in prison because of his activities in the African Nationalist Organization. Well, excuse me, the African Nationalist Congress. He's going to be arrested for that. So by 1986, the white South African government continued to try to destroy those who resisted apartheid. Because by this time, we're in the 1980s, there's other countries in Africa that have gained their independence. Now the whole world is knowing what's going on in South Africa and telling them they need to change their whole system of apartheid. So for 3 years, the government is going to arrest, torture, and imprison over 20,000 people in South Africa. And I just told you Nelson Mandela was one of those individuals, but he was in prison way before 1986. And he was kept in prison for 27 years for protest activities. However, as time changes, people change. The African National Congress will finally be granted a status as a political party, no longer a terrorist group or a resistance group. They are going to become a political party, and eventually Nelson Mandela is going to be released from prison because of pressure from the world, and he's actually going to run on the ticket for the ANC, and he's going to become the first black new president because 63% of the votes went to him. And that is going to be a historical moment in South Africa's history. Although South Africa and the black Africans and apartheid has ended, they still face some struggles as far as the type of jobs they get, their education system, and we'll talk more about that in class. You'll also learn more about Nelson Mandela for those that have permission to watch the movie next week. And that's it.